Hello and welcome to my patch notes rundown for the 14th of June. This week's update introduces huge quality of life changes to the use of summoning. This includes some practical automations for skilling familiars, ease of access to familiar information through tooltips, and a complete overhaul of the layout and graphics. When the text is highlighted yellow, it indicates that I'm reading the patch, and when it's highlighted green, it indicates I'm explaining the impact of the patch. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Familiars will now call back to players faster when stuck behind environment. This is checked every 1.2 seconds, and your familiar will only call back to you if there's a 3-tile gap between you and where it's stuck. Familiars that previously only fought in self-defense can now be ordered to attack. Unfortunately, these non-aggressive familiars can't be set to automatically attack your target. Quite the shame, since they do a decent chunk of damage, actually competing with offensive familiar auto-attack DPS. The only downside would be that in some rare cases, monsters will attack your familiar, but even that seems inconsistent and unintended. A new familiar combat mode setting can set your familiar to default, attack same target, reactive, or passive. Default is nice during Slayer when you want your familiar to finish off a low HP monster when switching to a different target. Attack same target can be easier to control but not necessarily better for bossing. Just remember, when using the attack same target option, you literally can't get your familiar to attack any other target than your current one. The duration of all familiars have been standardized to increments of 16 minutes. The Anachronia Totem of Summoning now increases all familiar durations by 16 minutes. However, Spiritual Healing still extends familiar duration by 20% of its base time. All familiars can now store their respective scrolls. The following familiars can now auto-fire their scrolls: Spirit Spider, Macaw, Spirit Terrorbird, Ibis, Fruit Bat, Nightmare Musper, Ghast, and Ravenous Locust. The two notable familiars in this list are Spirit Spider and Fruit Bat, which are used to generate valuable resources such as red spider eggs at 3.5k each and papaya at 7.2k each. You can now summon a Beast of Burden pouch while having a legendary pet summoned with the Beast of Burden passive, instead of having to use the pouch on the legendary pet. Let's move on to the familiar interface. Various icons have been updated with new graphics. The interface overall does look better, even though it seems to be primarily designed for mobile. However, my only practical complaint is that the call and cast buttons are too far apart, and most people don't have enough space on their action bars to place them there. The familiar special points bar is now green, the same color as its action bar variant. Added a button to set the special attack auto fire rate and remove the right click option to do the same thing on the special points bar. Added a new button to directly access familiar settings from the settings interface. Added a new button to store or take scrolls with 4 different right click options. Added a new information panel which, when expanded, displays all information regarding the familiar, which could usually be found by hovering over the pouch. In my opinion, hover tooltips and information panels are some of the best ways to teach players about the game without cluttering the normal game view. Added hover tooltips to the new interface icons. The indicator for scrolls remaining in the backpack and held by the familiar have been separated into 2 independent icons. Interface components will now automatically adjust when resizing the interface. The resize changes also apply to the Beast of Burden inventory view. This doesn't seem to change anything other than the Beast of Burden inventory size, which is no different to prior update. Added 2 new settings to automatically close and open the follow detail interface when a familiar spawns or despawns. Despawning familiars will no longer automatically close open interfaces. A noteworthy example is the bank interface no longer gets forced closed by your familiar despawning. And finally, familiar quality of life. Tooltips for summoning pouches now display summoning level required, familiar duration, type of familiar, familiar passive, relevant scroll and effect, which combat mode is enabled by default, and highlighted keywording. The amount of information within these tooltips is perfect. It tells players everything they need to know about the familiar while also presenting them in digestible sections. Familiar scrolls now display the familiar they belong to and how many special move points they'll consume. Familiar scrolls are now also named after the respective familiars. This makes it significantly easier to search for the respective familiar scrolls on the Grand Exchange. You no longer have to ponder on the name of the scroll. Various familiar actions can now be dragged to the action bar. Give to beast of burden, take from beast of burden, dismiss familiar, call familiar, cast scroll, auto attack, renew familiar. When a familiar despawns, any scrolls it was holding will now be sent to the backpack. If there is no space available, they will go to the bank. If the bank is also full, they'll be dropped. This also includes when you die at bosses. You will no longer lose scrolls. The term summoning special points has been changed to familiar special points. Dungeoneering and stealing creation familiars benefit from all the changes. Blackstone arrows are no longer consumed while using abilities on a target that is already at the maximum debuff. This is really nice since previously you would continue to consume arrows even if the target was at maximum stacks, yielding no benefit. And that's it for this week's patch notes. It's good to have the ninjas back as these updates usually come with a ton of high quality patches. Overall this strike was great, but I do feel uncomfortable that most interface changes have been leaning towards mobile rather than desktop users. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you for watching and take care.